Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tastemakers podcast. This is, of course, the podcast where we talk about everything in the world of TV and film and talk about what's the best on TV, what's the worst on TV, what you should be watching, what you shouldn't be watching. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, and with me today, as always, is my co-host, Grace. How you doing, Grace?
I'm doing well. It's hot outside, but I'm inside watching TV, so it's fine. Yeah.
Well, this is maybe a bit of a jam-packed episode. There's tons of news to talk about, some renewals, some drama in the world of TV with some Last of Us news. We've got tons of new shows to talk about that came out this week, and as well as a couple of movies. Lots of shows coming up: Foundation, Dexter, Always Sunny, tons of stuff, as well as some movies. Of course, Superman is coming, so.
Yep.
Lots to talk about in the weekly sense, but we are also going to, now that we are about halfway through the year, we're going to talk about what are the top 5 shows of the year so far. That is on the docket today, Grace.
I don't know about you. I feel like I had a very hard time narrowing it down to 5. I mean, I think that there are like elite television shows, but I think it's a very good television year. So there's going to be some snubs, I think, today.
Yeah, it was a little tough. I'm not gonna lie, and I've got a little bit of a, like, for my list. There's one in there that I'm like, maybe it's in, maybe it's not. We gotta talk about it. But
Yeah.
So here's the plan. We're gonna run through the podcast, I think, as normal. At the end of the podcast, we'll do our top 5, and then probably after the top 5, also we have both finished season 3. AKA season 2, part 2 of Squid Game, the final season. And so we're going to get into some spoilers about Squid Game at the very, very end of the podcast. So lots to do, Grace. Let's just jump straight in.
Okay, let's do it.
Well, speaking of Squid Game, there's been some interesting discussion around Squid Game, I think, because the 3rd season came out with seemingly very little fanfare. Like, a lot of people are like, what? Squid Game's out? Isn't this like the big cultural phenomenon? And then people were like, oh man, nobody's talking about Squid Game. But that was kind of the narrative around like the second Avatar movie. Also, like, nobody talks about Avatar anymore. And then it broke records again. Well, Squid Game did the same thing. It set viewership records for Netflix. And even though it seems like people didn't know it was coming, it has in fact just crushed. Everyone's watching it.
Yeah, I do think the thing of I feel like shows like, for example, The Bear that we'll talk about in a bit, because I think it also got renewed.
Mm-hmm.
A show that comes out every year is a little bit like, oh, that's weird in this day and age. A show that comes out like within basically 7 months of each other is a little weird. Obviously, you joke that it's season 2 and season 2 part 2, which is basically true. But I do feel like, for what it's worth, in terms of shows having these long breaks, it's very that unusual for I feel like, to get the marketing back up for Squid Game season 3. But yeah, it did come out, seemingly broke Netflix viewing records. So yeah, we're gonna talk about it later today. But good for Netflix, I guess. Other than that, that's it. That's all. Or is it? We'll talk about as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, my theory on the, like, people aren't talking about it as much is that I feel like because it was kind of a part 2 of a season rather than its own new season, it's like, what really was there to talk about? Like, it was just like, oh yeah, that's gonna finish now. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like when Squid Game 2 comes out, you're like, oh man, a new Squid Game. What's gonna happen? What is it going to be like, but when it's all, you already know, you're just finishing the existing story at that point. So I think that was maybe part of it.
Yeah, and maybe one other thing too is, like, when a show breaks out and it's new, there is an easier conversation that can be had about the show, which is, you watch this new thing and people are like, no, and you're like, you should watch it, it's really good.
Oh, it's like they play kid games but they die.
Yeah. And if they have, like, oh my God, okay, let's talk about it. There's a little bit of a weird thing where, like, I mean, I make this joke all the time where, like, you can't really have, these like super in-depth combos about television like we used to, because not everybody watches the same things all the time. So it's like I'll chat with my brother and be like, oh, like, he's like, oh, I'm rewatching season 2 of this thing because season 3 is about to come out. And like, no, we haven't started yet. I'm going to wait for it all to drop and then I'll watch it. Like, nobody's quite at the same point. And so you can't quite have the same conversations about a show that I think is in its second or third or whatever season, especially these shows that I think do drop in the binge, which I think, yeah, it does. Because, yeah, I saw very little about Squid Game on my social media as well. Basically, there was like one clip that we can chat about, which is the thing that happens, sort of the post credit scene, although it's not a post credit scene that happens in the show. So, I think that influences how much people sort of talk about the show per se. But
Mhm.
watching.
Well, you did mention The Bear, which was in fact renewed for a season 5, which I think is a little bit surprising because I believe the original like intent was for it to be 3 seasons, and
Yeah.
then they kind of extended the third season into 2 seasons, and so now it has been renewed for a 5th season, which means theoretically, at least, they are going into sort of like uncharted territory with The Bear.
Yeah, if you've watched the show, the season 4 ends on this moment that you certainly could just end it there, and I actually think I would give the show a ton of credit for like kind of the restraint. It would be a very satisfying ending, but there definitely is a lot more story to tell. And I think it's kind of a no-brainer actually that it's coming back for a season 5. This is just such a at the very least a critical success for the show, even though it has sort of fallen out of favor in terms of best comedy. I think last year Hacks won, and then I definitely think there's a different show. I think the studio is going to take best comedy this year. It just feels like it has that sort of buzz, so it's not quite winning, but the acting in the show is so incredible that I think it will continue to rack up those awards, and it does seem to be watched, and people seem to be higher on this than the last one. So yeah, coming back for another season, and presumably in June of next year. So won't be long.
A couple of other announcements I found interesting. One is, I don't know if you watched this, Cyberpunk Edgerunners.
I never watched this. No.
Was on, I believe, Netflix, and it was actually like a very good little like anime show in the world of Cyberpunk, which is the video game that came out,
Right.
to its own sort of controversy. It has been announced that there's going to be a new season of Cyberpunk Edgerunners, so that is kind of cool news. There's another thing though. I don't even know if this will have a listing in IMDb yet, but I'm glad my mom died is
Oh yeah.
a book written by Jeanette McCurdy, and kind of made some headlines, a little while ago. Uh, she's like an old like Nickelodeon Disney star. She like starred with Ariana Grande, and I'm not an expert on this, but she wrote about like sort of her mom and her childhood growing up and being on these shows. And it has been announced that Jennifer Aniston will be playing her mom in a TV adaptation of this book. I'm glad my mom died.
Gemma Curdy is known for being in the show Sam and Cat, which my nieces watch a lot, but she's also in some other sort of Nickelodeon style stuff. And yeah, I don't know if she did appear in the what's the name of that show that came, like the sort of expose on the terrible treatment that everybody had behind the scenes of Nickelodeon. Can't remember, doesn't matter. And yeah, so this was a very well reviewed sort of memoir, and so yeah, very fun to see. And I feel like it Jennifer Aniston has always, like, sometimes has had some bite to her roles, but I feel like she's always tried to play at the very least like likable, at
Mm,
least. And so if she's playing someone who's entirely unlikable, I'm very interested in that for Jennifer Aniston, I think. So
yeah,
it's kind of fun.
I did read this book. It was pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and then some drama, but not really. My theory is that it's not really drama, but
Okay.
The Last of Us has, of course, we talked about season 3 is coming. It has been announced there's going to be a season 4. The Last of Us famously has been co-created by Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin. Craig Mazin of Chernobyl fame. Neil Druckmann is the original creator of the video game. It has now been announced that Neil Druckmann will be leaving the show. heading into season 3. He is saying he's going to be focusing on his new upcoming game, which is a new IP that he is creating, and Craig Mazin will be taking sole control over The Last of Us.
Yeah, I don't think this is great. I don't think this is like the best news about The Last of Us. I do think that when you sort of hear them, when you would hear Druckmann and Mazin talk about the show, I definitely do feel like there were moments where like Druckmann would almost be like, "Oh yeah," and then Mazin said we should do this thing, and I was like, "Oh," and like that's such a good idea. And so I do think Mazin, like there's a solid enough foundation that like Mazin does a really good job of like building on it. So the fact that it's like at least one of them is staying feels better, and the fact that like the season that is to come is one that is already written, and then Mazin can sort of like build on it. And as long as Druckmann isn't leaving sort of like angrily, in the George R. R. Martin of like, you're ruining the thing that I wrote, I think it's fine. And I'd actually be interested whether or not like maybe Druckmann just, I don't know why Druckmann is leaving, but as you said, like focusing on a game, but in terms of like, was he getting in the way of anything, whatever, and is that actually like, is he actually preserving something that like they're gonna miss once he's gone? I'm not that worried about it for The Last of Us season 3. I would be more interested if and when they do a season 4, is Druckmann involved in any way? So I'm not really panicking yet, Taran, but what do you think?
Well, I mean, the way that this story has been presented, I think, is very like as clickbaity as possible, basically, where it's like, after the failure of season 2,
Right.
the creator of The Last of Us is been kicked off the project, or like has bailed
Right.
on The Last of Us. And sort of, I mean, the official line genuinely from Neil Druckmann is just like, I'm going to work on this game. I don't have the bandwidth to do both. Which, games are quite difficult to make. So
Yeah,
it is
100%.
entirely feasible that that's the case. I felt like I noticed that Neil Druckmann didn't seem to have as much participation in season 2 in terms of like writing credits. And he obviously made the one episode. He's generally people's favorites of the season. But even in like the podcast, it seemed as though he was less involved in the creation of season 2 than he was in the creation of season 1.
Right.
So who knows? I'm sure there are plenty of reasons why this could be the case, but I think for now it makes sense to take it at face value. I don't think that like Neil Druckmann took a ton of heat for the second game, The
Yeah.
Last of Us, much more heat than I would say the show has taken. So he doesn't strike me as the kind of person that's going to be like, "Ooh, I'm taking too much heat for this. I need to bail." So who knows? But it's definitely interesting and could definitely impact how the show, is certainly made moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
All right. Any other news, Grace?
I don't think so. Not that I saw. No.
Okay. Well, there are some new shows this week. The first of which is The Sandman, season 2, volume 2. It's weird to call it volume 2 because there's actually 10 volumes. But this is the final season for Sandman, or The Sandman. Of course, sort of there's a bit of a dark cloud looming over this season, with the news about Neil Gaiman, and all of that. But the second season has dropped. It is the final season. Grace, have you seen any of this?
I've seen 4 out of 6. I've watched almost. I was traveling for the weekend, so I didn't get to watch quite as much as I would have liked to, but I did watch the majority of it. So I wanted to finish it, but I wasn't able to finish this batch. Man, I think the show is really good. I think it's really fun. I think like I know it's a bummer that it's Gaiman, but he built such a cool and interesting world. We pick up close to where we were the last season. There's a thread from season 1 that picks up into season 2. Gwendolyn Christie is back in a role. There's a very fun arc that we get into, like sort of over. It to me, this is so, there's so much like D&D ness to this, and I know like this was made a long time ago, but like he has a thing he has to do, and that he like gets caught up in a thing that he has to do while he's on his way to do the thing. Is like kind of the easiest way to simplify like the story. And I just think it's like it's so fun, it's so good the way that they use historical figures, and like mythology people and celebrity and all that stuff. I just think it's like it's really exceptionally done. I'm actually like I was I totally understand why they're doing this the way they did, that this is the last season. I am pretty bummed after watching 4 episodes that there won't be any more of this after this I know there's more episodes to come this season, but that there won't be more of this show in particular, because I just think it's really good, Taran.
Yeah, I watched the first episode, and I was not my favorite episode of the Sandman, and I've heard it was probably the weakest of the bunch. But I mean, so like this is kind of strange because on a personal level, watching it, I grew up, I read Sandman growing up, huge fan, watched the show, loved the show. And now I'm sort of like consuming the story in a different medium, but also now for the first time with the context of like who Neil Gaiman is.
Right.
And it is hard to get out of my head. It is hard to not think about it as you sort of see, because especially because I always sort of saw the character of Sandman of Morpheus as sort of like to some degree an analog to Neil Gaiman. He kind of
Right.
looks similar to the guy.
Yeah.
And it definitely is sort of it's impacted the way that I'm consuming it for sure. I can still appreciate sort of like the story and what it meant to me, especially when I was a kid, on its own. But it is interesting in terms of just like how I'm consuming it personally, and also just like you know, it's weird to see his name on it, like on the credits.
Yeah.
Like, oh, and it like makes me think about like the Harry Potter show coming up, and there are different circumstances and different sort of
It's a good comp. I think it's going to be very
um,
weird for that thing to be like just out and on, the Harry Potter
yeah,
show.
well, because like I mean, for me, I also grew up reading Harry Potter,
Same.
and I haven't consumed any Harry Potter since it's been a while since she went off the deep end. And again, like they've done very different things. And on one hand, she is sort of like using the wealth that she accumulates via these things to perpetuate the things that she's doing, which in some ways is worse, but in other ways, maybe what he's done is more sort of tangential in terms of like doing it to a certain person. It's not about comparing them, but like it's just like it's interesting and frustrating to experience these things that meant a lot to you as a kid and sort of have to grapple with, what does this mean to me now, and what does it mean that I'm even like watching it, supporting it in any way, and what kind of things does that say? It's I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of that when it comes to the Harry Potter series coming up, but I think for me at least, it helps that this is like theoretically the end of the Sandman, and there will be theoretically no more of this. And it was made before anyone knew what was going on with Neil Gaiman, and they're just kind of dropping this. So it's like, yeah, I don't feel too bad about like watching this, but it definitely has so far impacted the way that I'm seeing it to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think is the most sort of complicated about Gaiman is that, and the Sandman, is that there's so much in there about morality and good and bad, and and it's intertwined like magical theory into like our lives. And I do feel like that becomes, when you kind of see someone doing something awful, like there's a line I think in episode 1 where like something happens to a character and it's like there's something like they're kind of an awful person, and you're like, oh yeah, that is like, you do get this like just thing of like, oh, that's where the Gaiman wrote that, like what was he thinking when he wrote that, because this stuff has come out. So yeah. Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I the thing about like him and Rowling that I do feel like is different is the way that like this this is like they're clearly just trying to salvage, the
Mhm.
fact that this has already started, as opposed to like they're literally rebooting the Harry Potter, like they're redoing the
Yeah,
whole
like
thing.
the Harry
Uh,
Potter thing is like once the allegations about again, it's stupid to compare the two because they're very different things. But
Yeah, they
like,
are very different.
but in terms of just like a very controversial figure, it's like, oh well, let's start up a new Sandman series with a ton of money into like, it's like that would feel very different than the current thing.
Yes, agreed. So, yeah, I mean, I'm really enjoying the actual like television show product. I'm a huge hypocrite because I do not watch any Harry Potter stuff, and I have not engaged, and I try at the very least not to give her any money. At the same time, like I pay for Netflix part, in part I watch WWE wrestling stuff, and that company is like they literally went to Saudi Arabia as stuff was happening in the Middle East. So I'm a total hypocrite. My lines on what I will and won't watch vary, greatly depending on whatever. It's really hard, especially in this of trying to watch as much stuff. But yeah, anyway, I do think I'm a little bummed. I'm not bummed that they're not like I totally understand why they're not doing Sandman, and in some ways I agree with that decision to not do any more of the Sandman. On the other hand, I'm like, oh, this is such a good story, So yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
There's a show I missed the premiere of it, but the first episode has aired now on Netflix. Dandadan is back. I would call it season two, but I don't know if it's season two or if it's like a continuation of season. I don't really understand
Mm,
how these seasons work sometimes with anime, but it's back, and it was a very good anime that came on Netflix a little while ago, and people are very excited about it. It really blew up, and it's now back. I haven't watched the episode yet, but I'm excited to.
yeah, people really like this show. Yeah,
It's good.
yeah. I've not watched any of it.
Um, any other shows you watched this week?
No, I feel like I mostly caught up on like I finished Squid Game and I watched The Sandman. So yeah.
Well, of course, there are some movies that
I
came out
did
this
I
week.
did watch
Of
this.
course,
I did watch this movie. So
Jurassic World Rebirth.
yeah. Um, I find this movie. So this is a movie. This is a like quasi reboot. I think technically kind of in canon with every film that's happened. I don't know that they've ever like officially been like, oh yeah, this didn't matter. But this is a reboot from like sort of the Chris Pratt stuff
Mhm.
where I heard there was I was listening to somebody talk about how the big problem with Jurassic Park is that you either have to go to the park where the monsters are or the dinosaurs have like come to Earth, and you're constantly in like the reverse of that thing. And so this one is like there are dinosaurs around, but mostly not really, and like there are still some who live on like these like islands around the equator, so they're going to go to the island around the equator for different reasons. This is kind of two different movies essentially to recreate kind of like a lot of the like moments like the theatrical moments of the very first movie. And so you have the Scarlett Johansson, Jonathan Bailey, Mahershala Ali, like we're going to do a thing, which the thing is they're trying to get like blood samples from the three biggest dinosaurs, one in water, one on land, one that flies. And at the same time, there's also like a dad who's like sailing in a sailboat with his kids, and their boat crashes, and so now you also have like children in peril basically, so it's doing both of those things. And the thing that I feel like I really like Gareth Edwards, who did this film. He's done like Creator, and he did a Godzilla movie. I think he did Monsters. And I think he's an extremely good visual storyteller. Like the thing that
Mhm.
he clearly like that he was hired to do was to make big dinosaurs look incredible on the screen, and he does. There are very moments I've heard him be described as, in terms of like what you're looking at, being very Spielberg-esque in terms of like the epic nature of what you're seeing on screen. He really gets it, and I totally agree with that. And there are moments in this film that really work. I think all collective as like a story, it just doesn't work at all. It's missing something to make it like sort of like movie magic, I think. That's how I feel, and I feel like that's how a lot of critics felt. I think that audiences have been a little bit higher. If you look at the Rotten Tomato score, I think that that's in like the 70s as opposed to the 50% for the critic score. But I have to say, Taran, this movie did extremely well at the box office, so we're just definitely going to get more Jurassic World Park movies because it did like over $300 million this
Yes.
weekend.
just
Yeah.
dominating box office performance, despite mixed reviews, which reminds me a lot of Jurassic World, the original.
100%. Just in line with what it's been doing for years, I feel like.
People
Yeah.
just love dinosaurs, I think.
And you know what? I also think this is like a really good run for the movie because it's about to be facing off for IMAX theaters with both Superman and Fantastic Four. And so just like what a good, like that's good. I think, you know, like in terms of me wanting people to go to movies, like I want movie theaters to go. I definitely do think there's a thing now where like, you know, this is what the Megan director was talking about. I don't know. Did we talk about this already? That he went on the town and talked about how immediately the weekend after Megan failed, he went on the town to talk about how the movie failed, which I was really interesting. He talks about their mistake to like genre pivot, which we said exactly was like I was like, yeah, it's an action thriller. You're like, that doesn't make sense. Megan is a horror movie franchise, and you're like, he went on a podcast was like, yeah, we shouldn't have switched the genre to action thriller. We should have kept it as a horror movie. And his statement was, people will go to the movies, but we don't know why they'll go to the movies. And like that has been the thing. People don't consistently go to the movies, but when there's something that for some reason draws them in, which seems to be an event type thing, I think it does. I think Jurassic World Rebirth here did really well. I think Superman's going to do really well. Fantastic Four should probably do really well. These to me make sense as like event type things that you would go to watch. And so that's what people are looking for, even if annoyingly, those are all franchise IP.
Did you watch any other movies this week?
I didn't watch any other movies. No.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
anything else to catch up on before we talk about what's coming soon?
I don't think so. I think yeah, I feel like I was a pretty trim watch list this past week.
Okay. So we will be talking Squid Game spoilers later. We will also be talking about our best shows of the year so far in just a sec. But coming this week, there's a bunch of stuff. One of them, of course, already mentioned, Superman. The Superman movie is coming. I'm curious now. How many like first Superman movies are there?
Yeah, let's see. There's been a fair bit. There's a okay, so there is the original sort of like 80s Superman, right? So there is Superman Returns in 2006, and then I feel like there actually hasn't been that many
Interesting
just Supermans, right? The extended universe Superman, like Man of
Superman has
Steel.
always been like the superhero.
I would agree with that.
And the interesting thing is that it has sort of underperformed in the era of superheroes overperforming in the box
Yeah.
office. So this is really like the statement piece. James Gunn has taken over the DCU, and will Superman be a hit? Will it make a bunch of money? Will it be good? All of those things are kind of open questions at this point.
Yeah, isn't that kind of strange? Like, it feels like there's been way more Superman movies, but we basically have Superman in 1978. Like, we have the Donner Superman. We have Man of Steel. So Snyder did it before, and then James Gunn is doing it in 2025. I mean, you've also have like you had Smallville. Like, not that it's not a movie, but you have had Superman around. I think there's got to be other
Lots
TV
of TV shows, I imagine.
Yeah. But yeah, I do. It's funny because I do feel like Superman kind of feels like he's been like it's like well trodden material. And I did see. I think it was James Gunn. It might have been Zack Snyder who said like there are a few scenes I never need to see in movies ever again. Which is I don't need to see Spider-Man get bit by a spider. I don't need to see Superman crash on Earth. And I don't need to see Batman's parents die. And I do agree with that. Like there are certain superheroes that they're just so prolific that we've seen this story done a million times. So but nevertheless, I do feel like this is kind of the only like and again, like people can correct me if I'm wrong, but it does feel like sort of like launching point Superman films. It's kind of the third one. Like we've had a lot of Superman films. Just sort of like, oh, it's a new Superman. So yeah. I'm very excited for this, Taran. I'm gonna be checking it out. I'm
hopeful.
Yeah.
I think James Gunn has made some good stuff. The cast looks pretty good to me. Obviously, there's a lot of hype around it. I have not watched any of the trailers. I'm trying to go in as blind as possible. So We'll see. We'll see. This is gonna be big. This is like really big for this entire genre, really. So
I've had that. Yeah, I think it's a big. People keep saying it's a big month for comic book hero movies, which I do agree with. I think the success of Superman, the success of Fantastic Four, I think will tell us a lot. The thing here's my like sort of thing about superheroes is that I do think, depending on sort of what the broader climate is like, I think different superheroes, this is like not a hot take. Different superheroes obviously resonate more. And my theory about sort of you look back to sort of like 2016 to 2020, there was a real desire for like kind of like warm and fuzzy, give me a hug, type stuff in terms of like Schitt's Creek and Ted Lasso, the two that sort of come to mind. I think we kind of got like a backlash to that. I do feel like with the state of the world, and there was a very like I feel like a James Gunn I think did an interview this week that said yes, the story of Superman is about an immigrant coming to America and like doing nice things, being kind. And there was an immediate backlash to that from a certain population being like, wait, no, that's not what Superman is. It's like, no, bro, that's what Superman's always been about. And I do think that type of story, a do-gooder, we're here to good, could do really, really well, I think, in this environment, depending on how it's depicted. And the other thing is like Lex Luthor is the villain in this movie, a big bad billionaire. That feels pretty ripe, Taran, for this weekend for it to have a really big, like kind of a moment. So I don't know. We'll see.
I'm reading this like little sort of like synopsis, and it says, as the embodiment of truth, justice, and the human way, he soon finds himself in a world that views these as old-fashioned. So,
yeah,
clearly to me, it seems to be an attempt at a modern take on Superman in a way that maybe hasn't quite existed before, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
There's another movie coming out this week as well, with Nick Offerman, Sovereign, a crime thriller inspired by true events. I feel like I've seen the preview for this movie a bunch of times.
I haven't seen this at all. I don't think. I don't think I've gotten a single preview for this movie.
Nick Offerman, Dennis Quaid, and it is a father and son who identify as sovereign citizens. A group of anti-government extremists find themselves in a standoff with the chief of police. Sets off a manhunt. So,
what's so funny about this movie is that like Offerman had like a libertarian view, but I do feel like he's like rather progressive. And then Dennis Quaid, I think, has been like not progressive. So kind of funny that they're both in the like we're sovereign citizens. Where I've seen a lot of sovereign. I watch a lot of TikToks, Taran, where people get pulled over. And they're like, "No, I'm a sovereign citizen," or they're like in court and they're like, "No, I'm a sovereign citizen," and they're the most annoying people ever. So I am in fact intrigued by a sovereign citizen movie. Christian.
Yeah, I'm interested. All right, there's a few shows, quite a few coming out. Foundation season 3 is coming, and this is I would equate this to like a Wheel of Time-esque show, where it is, I would say, much more so, even having deviated from the books, but out of necessity. The first season was a bit hit or miss. The second season I thought was much more hit than miss. And so far, I've heard the third season is even better. And so I'm actually quite excited to watch Foundation season 3. I actually think that the part of the story that they're getting into is the most conducive to visual storytelling than so far. And so I think that is going to be playing to its strengths as well. So I'm excited for Foundation season 3.
Yeah, I really like season 1. I like a lot of the ideas. This is an ideas show, I feel like, where some of the things they do, I'm like, oh, that's so clever. It's so interesting. And that really is, the reason why the book was sort of so hard to adapt is because it's very much sort of like across time. And
it's an ideas book. I mean, it's a foundational, pun intended, sci-fi series.
Well, part of the idea actually behind it is that there's this idea of that, like, you can sort of use mathematics to predict history, but part of the important piece of that is that like people aren't that important, and actually
Exactly.
like and then that creates a sort of interesting issue when you're making a television show where you need stars. You need Lee Pace and Jared Harris and whoever else you're going to have in your show. And they managed to just kind of like figure that out, I feel like. And I really enjoyed season one. I thought that, I mean, certainly you're right when you say hit and miss. In particular, the story of the emperor who has
Mhm.
been cloned, and there's always sort of three versions of him sort of growing up, and when the oldest one dies, then the new one is a baby is born, another clone version of this emperor. That entire storyline and where that goes, I thought was like by far the most interesting thing. And I definitely do feel like as season two happens, like the other storylines sort of like rise up to meet that storyline in a way that I found very compelling. So very excited to check out season three of Foundation this week. I believe they're likely to do a couple episode drops. Let's check what they're doing, but typically a week to week release for Foundation. I'm just gonna try to pull it up here as we're chatting. Yeah, it looks to be. It looks like they're just dropping one episode on July 11th, and then weekly from there until September. So
Mm,
we'll probably check in with this as we go.
yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, Dexter Resurrection. More Dexter is coming. Um, this is a big one. This is a big swing they're making with Dexter. They somehow made the prequel series work, and now they are making the sequel to the sequel series. And it's got Peter Dinklage, it's got Uma Thurman, and it's got a resurrected Dexter. So,
It has more than that, Taran. It's got Dinklage, Uma Thurman, Neil Patrick Harris, Eric Stonestreet, David Dalmachius is he was Dalmachian, sorry, he's from Late Night with the Devil as well. You even on the screen right now, there's potentially a name on there that people may or may not, be interested to see. This, I think that some cameo appearances have been confirmed, but I've seen the first 4 episodes of this. I think, to me, you know, part of what I liked about Dexter was that, yeah, it was a bit campy and goofy, but I mean, maybe it was just always like that. I just have to go back and remember. But there's definitely that in this, like the voiceover and, his dad, Harry, is, he's having visions of him who had Harry's code. I think people are going to like this. I think it is like cheesy, and obviously they're doing they're doing a thing here in terms of resurrecting him and continuing on this story. You know, yeah, we get you probably there is a lot of Dexter New Blood lore. Like there's it's interesting that this is like they're not just doing Dexter, it's because they already did a reboot and then
mhm.
now they're rebooting the reboot. So yeah.
Well, New Blood, I felt was like a more serious take on Dexter in terms of how they marketed it and in terms of like how the show kind of played out for the most part. Whereas Dexter Resurrection, even just from the poster, screams like throwback. Screams like we're going campy again. We're getting back to our roots.
It's pretty campy.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's kind of what I'm expecting, especially having come off of Dexter Rebirth or whatever it was.
Original Sin. Is that what you
Original
mean?
Sin.
Yeah, Original Sin. Yeah.
If you had to pick one, Original Sin or Resurrection, how does it stack up?
You know what? I will say, just because I think Dexter Original Sin gets better as it was going, I think that probably from what I've seen so far, I like Dexter Original Sin a little more than I like Dexter Resurrection. But I'm only 4 episodes in to Dexter Resurrection of I presume a 10 episode, I think a 10 episode season. So I think there's opportunity with Dexter Resurrection. Like I do feel like it's taking a little bit to like get to what it's trying to do. And I guess
Mhm.
part of it is I don't even really know what it's trying to do other than just be like, Dexter's back, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah.
I should have some
Um,
interviews with the full guy. I mean, if it's terrible, I'm saying so like I'm like, yes, or I should be have some interviews. Certainly I will have a feature on David Zayas, who plays Angel Batista. I'll have an exclusive with him, and then I should have some interviews with all of the cast and crew coming out sometime after the premiere episode. So
all right.
yeah.
Well, It's Always Sunny is coming back for season 17.
Wild.
Yeah. They're doing their crossover episode, their half of it with Abbott Elementary, and just more Sunny.
I'm okay. There was a thing recently. I think they were doing some press, and they did a Hot Ones, and it wasn't where like it's the one, like it's called Hot One Versus, where like two people kind of can just go and do
Oh.
promo by themselves, and they can do it. And it's the three of them, and they kind of joked that like there was one point where Glenn Howerton did kind of try to leave the show. He had an absence for I think almost a full season, if not the full season, and ultimately came back, and he was like, "Yeah, I guess we'll just do this forever." I think, right? Like they're just like, "Yeah, let's just do it forever." They all have side stuff, like Caitlin Olsen has that show High Potential, and Rob McElhenney, who did you hear the Rob Mack stuff?
Yeah, he wants to change his name to Rob Mack.
He is legally changing his name to Rob Mack. He's just going to be Rob Mack, to the great annoyance of his wife and his children, who are like, "Our last name is McElhenney," and he's like, "Well, whatever." It gave me weird.
But does
vibes.
that mean his name will be Rob McElhenney?
No, it's just, he'll be like his last name. He will be Rob Mack, first name
Okay.
Rob, last name Mack. So yeah. Anyway, they're just gonna do this forever, I think, which I don't really mind. I'm like some stuff in It's Always Sunny doesn't certainly hold up as much, but I feel like they've always sort of like moved with the times to a degree, and they're generally pretty good at like, in the South Park mold of like we'll make fun of anybody, and anything in a way that I think most of the time works for me. So
Well, speaking of, South Park had some interesting news.
Yeah, there's some content. Yeah.
Season 27 was slated to start this week. However, it has actually been pushed back, I believe 2 weeks right now, due to just like some weird like stuff going on at Discovery.
Yeah, I think this is actually just like the Paramount situation that is like it's actually the merger. The Paramount is supposed to merge with Skydance. Skydance will sort of like acquire Paramount and buy it from Sherry Redstone, and this is just like completely messed up a bunch of stuff. And so yeah. As they settled the lawsuit with the White House, with Trump, to basically like not to basically make sure that this merger could go through, and yet still the situation is all in flux. So I think it's because the episodes air on Comedy Central and then go to Paramount, and it's a whole there's just a weird contract thing that has messed it up that I believe Trey Parker and Matt Stone are very unhappy about.
Yes,
the rumor.
seemingly.
So yeah.
Couple of other shows. There's one called Ballard. Coming.
Bosch spinoff, Taran.
Yes, another Bosch. I guess Bosch. What was it? Bosch Redemption, Bosch Legacy. It wasn't technically a spinoff.
I think it was Bosch, and then it was Bosch New Blood, and then Bosch Original Sin, and then Bosch Resurrection, I believe.
And now it's Ballard.
Now it's Ballard. That's right.
Bosch is a show I started to watch when it first started airing, and I was like, not for me. And then it went on to have this massive, long career of a dynasty show, and now it's got this other spinoff. We'll see how it does. People love this kind of stuff. I'm sure it'll do well.
This is such an Amazon Prime show too. Oh, cop show. Oh, okay, yeah, that goes on Amazon Prime right there. Yeah. I have one more show. Were you going to talk about Too Much, Taran? This is a new Lena Dunham show.
Yes, that is another one that I had on my list
with Megan Statler. Yeah, Too Much. I love Megan Statler. People might know her from Hacks. Will Sharp as well. People would know him from The White Lotus, and he was in something else recently as well. But he was in A Real Pain, the movie. I really loved him in A Real Pain. But
yeah, he was good in that.
I'm very excited for this.
Yes, Too Much. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I think Lena Dunham has had an interesting career as a showrunner. So I would say also kind of hit or miss kind of creator, but this looks good.
You know, people have been going back to watch Girls, and I'm like, oh, I didn't really have no interest. And they're like, man, that show when it first started, that show slapped and still holds up. So I feel like Lena Dunham, she directed the first episode of Industry too. Like, she has a very interesting career. As I feel like she's like stepped out of the spotlight a little bit. Like, I feel like she has not been so central.
Mhm.
And so I'm intrigued by what she brings to a new television show in 2025.
Yes. Well, another show, a British show, Bookish, is coming out by Mark Gatiss. It's about just like a guy that owns a bookshop.
This got renewed before it aired, I think, is one of the things I saw about this. Uh yeah. People, you probably recognize Mark Gatiss. He's been in like
He's prolific
he's
in
been in
the
like
British
so much stuff. Yeah.
industry.
Um
Um, Very famously co-creator of Inside Number Nine, I believe, which is or maybe not co-creator of the show, just always in it, I guess.
hmm.
No, sorry, yeah, he's just an act. It's I get these people confused. Steve Pemberton, Reese Shearsmith, neither of them are Mark Gatiss, but he is in that show. He is in the show quite a lot. But yeah, I mean, he's got a proven track record, and this looks like a fun crime drama. He's gonna like, I'm sure, solve crimes with his books or something.
That's a say, but I'm up for that. You know, I'm good
Right?
with that. Yeah.
And then one more, The Institute, which is a Stephen King adaptation. It's about I guess, an institute full of children with strange abilities. I actually have read this book. It was not, I think, one of his best, but it was like, it's certainly a good foundation to sort of like make a show from. And this is on MGM, so the same network as From, which I expect this to be of a similar level of quality in terms of just like some fun horror-esque, a little bit young adult feeling stuff. It does have Mary Louise Parker, so I think this could be very fun, could be very good.
Yeah, I feel like you know, trying to adapt a Stephen King. I mean, I guess the thing about adapting a Stephen King thing is that like the good ones have mostly been done. But you know, I'm up for it. You know,
Well,
interested.
the weird thing is that I'm like, wow, The Institute, that's like a pretty new book that he wrote.
Right.
And I'm going to look up this book.
2019.
2019. That
Yeah.
was 6 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how it happens. When I read it, it was the newest book he had written. And in my head, it still is one of the newer books he's written.
What has Ben Barnes has been in? Oh, Shadow and Bone he was in. Yeah, this guy, yeah, okay. I like Ben Barnes.
Mm.
He's in the Narnia series as well, so, and Westworld. Yeah, he's been, yeah. And The Punisher. He's good. I like him. Okay.
All right. Anything else coming up?
No, I don't think so. Not that's what I had for this week.
All right, then. Let's get into our top 5 shows of the year so far, halfway through. How should we do this? Do you want to start with, because what we'll do, I have a list, Grace has a list, and I believe the audience, you have a list as well that you
The audience
submitted.
has, yeah, the audience has
So
lists as well.
we could go kind of one by one, and then if we have crossovers, we'll just explain our thoughts on the crossover.
Okay, that makes
And
sense
then
to
maybe
me.
reveal where we put it later.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
And so we'll start maybe with number 5.
Let's do it. You want me to start with my number 5?
Well, let me just ask you a question first,
Yes,
because
please.
this matters for my list, because The Devil's Plan season 2
Oh,
is not a scripted show.
yeah, I didn't put any. Okay, I had one quasi unscripted thing, but I didn't ultimately include it. Man, I like as soon as you said it, my thought was not like, oh, that's not allowed. My thought was like, oh, that probably should be on my list. That's what I.
Well,
But I don't even
my
know what I
thing
would
is,
bump.
I think we should not include it,
Okay, let's
because
not
it's
include
so
it.
different from everything else. But
Agreed.
just know that if I were to include it, it would be number 1 or 2 for me. So
I absolutely agree with that. It's so good. It's so
yeah.
good. So that, yeah, just for the argument's sake, we just won't include it. We had one person on the list who submitted a reality show, and unsurprisingly, I think on this network it was Survivor, Taran. So we got one measly vote, I believe.
Not its best season, but
Not even its best season, but yeah.
All right. So yes, what is your number 5?
I really struggle with how, like, I feel like there's so many. I have like a full, what do I have here? I have like 10 plus shows that I have. So I feel like I'm really just like, this could change on any given day. But for now, I do think the highs of this season were so good, but I don't think the full breadth of the season is quite as good as a lot of other stuff. So I put Andor at number 5 on my list.
Andor, yes. Andor's great. Andor is on my list. It is not number 5.
Okay. That's yeah, it's just really good. I think that like that middle arc, I keep talking about it. I think it's episode 7. I think 7 and 8. I can't remember if it includes 9 as well, but that arc is just like, that is the arc, but whether the episodes I think are like just so tremendously good. You have this rebellion happening, and I just think it's like kind of immaculate. I think it's the highest the show gets over the course of 2 seasons. I know many people will disagree that like season 1 is stronger than season 2. I just still think it's so good. I think about Mon Mothma dancing the night away all the time. I really liked Andor, so it made my list.
Oh, sorry, I didn't bring it up.
That's okay.
Yes, Andor, number 5 for Grace. I will talk about Andor when it comes up for me. But my number 5 was The Last of Us season 2.
Yeah,
Last of Us, I believe, was in a similar spot the first season, where it was like basically tied with The Devil's Plan when it first came out for number 1. I am not nearly as down on season 2 as some people are. But I always kind of anticipated that I would not enjoy season 2 as much as season 1, because I liked the game of game 1 a lot more than game 2. That said, I still really liked the season. I still think it was really well made. I think that in particular, there are a couple of really strong episodes in here. And it's still a phenomenal show.
it's really good. I do kind of feel weird that I like didn't even really. I like I'm like, now I have to add it as honorable mention. I definitely would. I don't know what reason I have, because I feel like I was so much higher on it than I do think this tracks that you were higher on it than me. And so you having it at number 5 and me not having it on my list makes sense. Even though I think collectively we're both way higher on it than sort of other people who are out there. I do think it's really good. I think the performances are really good. Obviously, we get some gigantic moments. It is a good story. I think it's a resonant story. So I'm not mad that it's on your list. I think it probably makes sense that it didn't quite make mine.
All right. What was the audience's number 5?
The audience number 5 is let me just pull this up. Is okay. Here's where I think we should have because this isn't the show that I said counts as sort of like scripted, unscripted. But so they have The Rehearsal as their number 5, which
I
I
do have The
segue.
Rehearsal on my
Okay, I'll
list.
segue. It's my number 4, so I have it on the list as well, and so clearly you have it on your list as well. Is The Rehearsal?
Yes, The Rehearsal. Very good show.
It's so good. I think that the fact that it's like not as sort of scripted, even though there is a lot that's scripted in the show, I do think that's like where I like knock it down on my like, we know scripted TV, Tastemakers top 5. But on another day, I could call this number 1. I just think this is a work of comedic genius. I think it's so tuned in. Like, it's funny for a guy who's so awkward. I think you could only be that awkward if you understand, how society sort of works and what he's pointing out. There's just moments in the show that I think are unbelievably funny, but also so insightful. So I have it as number 4.
Yeah, I sort of thought about it as like, it's not like the others as much, but I don't even look at it as an unscripted show, because there is so much of it that is carefully plotted out.
Yeah.
The way that it's put together, some of the narration, some of like the, monologues, some of the setups, like, there are plenty of moments of unscripted bits to it, but overall, I think that part of what makes it so great is how crafted it is. And so it is on my list. I will not reveal yet where.
Okay. Your
So
number
this
4.
was your number 4, The
That's my
Rehearsal.
number 4, yeah. And the
My number
audience is
4.
number 5. It's a little
Yes.
confusing, but we'll get there.
My number 4 was Andor.
Okay.
That's where I had Andor. I loved Andor, as you mentioned. The middle section of of the second season was really good. I think that the highs of season 2, in particular, that middle arc, are higher than anything from season 1, but season 1 had more consistent high notes throughout, is what I would say. I liked the ending. I didn't love it. And overall, I thought it was still just phenomenal television. And I'm really happy that it was made. And it has made me more interested in Star Wars than anything else Star Wars related has in the last like decade at this point.
It that's so true. It made me want to go and watch a bunch of Star Wars, and I started watching other Star Wars and stopped watching other Star Wars. That's how good I think Andor is. Yeah.
Yeah. What is the audience's number 4?
Audience number 4 is adolescence.
Mm,
Which this is a great segue. That's actually my number 3 on the list. We'll just keep rolling here. Audience number 4 is adolescence.
wow.
I have it one higher at number 3. This is how strong the TV year is, that when I watch Adolescence, I thought this was for sure the best show I had seen all year. I think that for me, the reason why I dock it, and again, third best show of the year is really good. I dock it only because it's only 4 episodes. And to me, I feel like uh, there are shows that I think consistently sort of like do more and do just as good or not better than Adolescence. For me, it's funny. My take on Adolescence is that the episodes that seem to be like really working for people, which I think are 1 and 3, are actually the episode. I'm the opposite, where I thought 2 and 4 like really worked for me. I thought 1 and 3 are great as well. This was just so unique and surprising. This reminds me the most, not in content, but in terms of how surprising it was to a show like Baby Reindeer, where it just kind of like showed up on Netflix. We all watched it. We're like, wow, that was amazing, and I want more. In terms of, we were talking earlier about movies where it's like, yeah, okay, like Jurassic World did well and Superman's going to do well and Fantastic Four did really well. Okay, that's great. But like, this is the stuff where I'm just like, every year I'm hoping there's like a show like Adolescence that I get to watch because it's just surprisingly phenomenal. So Adolescence is here on my list at number 3.
Yeah, Adolescence, I think, is a show that if we were doing this last year, it would be like number 2 or something on my
Right.
list right now.
Right.
But for me, it just barely missed out on the list. It was an honorable mention for me, Adolescence. It's still a phenomenal show. But I think it was largely what you were saying. Like, it's just so much shorter. And I also binged it. So, like, it was such a flash for me versus a lot of these other shows were weekly releases, or at least a little bit longer. And so they kind of stuck with me a little bit more. And that said, it's still very, very good and
Yeah.
certainly worthy of the list.
That's my number 3. If you want to give your number
That's
3.
your number 3. My number 3, I have already talked about. It was The Rehearsal. That's number 3. I thought The Rehearsal might be like 1 or 2. In fact, it was very close to being number 2, but something else snuck in there at number 2. So The Rehearsal I put at number 3. Just a phenomenal season of television. You are muted, Grace.
I just said I agree. So yeah.
Okay, so the audience, what have they picked for number 3?
The audience for number 3 picked Andor, so they had it a
There
little
you go.
higher than both of us, but rated pretty high. Actually, just a little quick note here: The Rehearsal, which just came at number 5, at 26 points. The Adolescence had 27, so only beat it by 1 point. There's a big jump here, a 13-point jump to Andor, where you get 40 points. So, yeah, I think this is interesting because I don't have one of the shows. Basically, here's a little teaser here. One of the shows that I have in my top 2 is the same as one of the shows that the audiences has. The other one
Mhm.
is not the same. And I
I'm
think we've
curious to know.
already
I,
differed
I
a little
wonder if
bit.
we all have, because there's 2 shows remaining for every list. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if all 3 of us share one of the shows and then the other one is different for all 3 of us.
Yeah, I wonder if that's true.
It might be the case.
I think that has to be the case. There is a chance that you agree with the audience, but
Is a chance.
I don't think that's actually true. So then I'm trying to like map out what you would have as your either number 1 or 2. Well, let me tell you, because I mean, my number two and the audience's number two is the same, and it is, I feel like, sort of the breakout hit of 2025, which is The Pit.
Mm-hmm.
The Pit sort of broke out, and it's so good. Sort of it's not ER. It's not ER, but it's in the mode of ER, a 24-hour type show as well, doing that sort of time structure. And the show is just so good. My friend recently was I saw in the background they were watching the Pit, and they're like, "Yeah, I haven't really been paying attention." I was like, "No, go back, rewatch, start again, really watch it." And then like they messaged me like within a day, being like, "Okay, I've watched half the season. This is amazing." Just the character work here is so good. The plot details are great. The performances are great. So The Pit is my number two, and the audience's number two.
The Pit, at this point, you'd know it regardless. The Pit is my number one
Yeah,
of the year so far. I think it's just hard to deny. I think that it was 15 episodes week to week. Every single week, I looked forward to watching it. It just had no significant flaws to me. Just so solid all the way around, and also a show that I think is so universal. So many people are able to really love The Pit. It is not super divisive in any way. It's just something that a lot of people are able to enjoy, and so I think for me, The Pit had to be number one.
Yep, I think that's totally fair. The audience had it there as well. So this is where things get different. And I think it might be obvious what my number one is. It was a bit
Yours
of
is
a
probably
blow.
the most obvious.
Yeah, mine is The Bear. My number one is The
Mhm.
Bear. I just thought the way that show got to the last episode of the last season, I can't stop thinking about it. I think it's really good. As somebody who comes from a family where there was a lot of this is the thing why I don't really love to go back to the episode Fishes, which is like sort of the family episode. Is I did have like my I want to say, I almost like was gonna like downplay how like sometimes traumatic my childhood was a little bit in terms of like things didn't really happen to me, but they happened around me, and then I feel like so in the Carmy way, I feel like that's sort of like I can place myself in that situation, and it certainly has still affected me at times, and so I just think like where we got to at the end of the episode, I was like, oh my god, it's so perfect, it's so incredible, it's one of the best scenes of television I think I've ever watched, and so for that reason, I give, and I'm high on three, and I think four is better than three. So then I'm like, oh, it's all building on each other. So I just really love the last season of The Bear, and just gonna like kind of proudly stake my claim here as with The Bear being my number one show of the year so far. But there's a lot of good TV this year, Taran.
There really is. There
Yeah.
really is. I'm struggling to figure out what the audience number one is.
Do you want me to tell you before you unveil your answer, or shall you reveal your answer and then we'll
Maybe let's do the audience. No, let's do. I'll go first.
okay.
We'll save the audience for last because mine is number two. The audience is number one. My number two, and
Oh yeah.
maybe it is the audience's number. Who knows? But I
Mhm.
feel like I don't think so. My number two, Squid Game.
It's not the audience's number.
I didn't think so.
Yeah, it's not.
I
Squid Game.
love
Squid
this
Game had
season of
recency,
Squid
but
Game.
Squid Game had some recency bias and only got about 5 points total. So yeah.
I thought this was such a good season. It is not flawless. There are certainly flaws, but I thought the ending was phenomenal. I thought the sort of whole arc of this show was really great. I think that like what's interesting is that I think I was a little lower on season one than most people were, but much higher on seasons two and three than I think a lot of people are. I think that like just it obviously speaks to a lot of themes that I am particularly interested in. And I thought the performances were really great. And I really enjoyed it. And I'm excited to talk about it after we finish this list.
I really like it. I'm actually, this is kind of a perfect segue because we're gonna go and spoil Squid Game. I do like it. I like season two and I like season three. Um, I definitely understand where people are a bit reactive to the end of the show, but ultimately for me, I think it's a stronger story. I think it's really well written. I think that if you I don't know. I think it's really good. I'm a little surprised. I'm more surprised that well, not more surprised. It's just recency thing that is going to affect the abilities of people to vote for it. I maybe am surprised that it's your number one show of the year so
Number
far,
two.
but oh, it's your number two
Yeah.
behind The Pit. That actually makes more sense. It is really good. I think maybe if I even had more time to sit with it, I would be more likely to put it on my list. I kind of have it in my probably like 6 or 7, I think.
It's possible, because I really thought The Rehearsal would be my number 2. It's possible that just having watched Squid Game more recently, that helped it push it over the edge over Rehearsal, because they are pretty close. But I just haven't been able to kind of stop thinking about this show since I finished it. So
Makes sense to me. That would put okay. Well, the audience number one, Taran, the show that they liked more than anything else, which I do think this probably has a little bit of like an RHAP. We know scripted TV. There's a little bit of some bleed in here. Not that it's an unfair choice, but it is Severance, which I think a lot
oh,
of
I forgot about
people.
that.
Yeah, I think that like it was really good. I would have it probably like I think that those are the two shows for me, Squid Game and Severance, that probably just miss the cut for me. Just in terms of how good they are. Um, I I do think that season 2 is a step down from season 1 in the way that the tone of the show for me changed enough that I felt like it was a step down. I think that it was less whimsical, which I do get why it's not as whimsical, but at the same time I do feel like it was like sometimes missing that. It certainly also like, this is a show in the finale had like a marching band play in an office. It definitely had moments of whimsy, but there was something about it that I felt like it didn't feel as coherent, I think, as season 1 did. I still think it's very good. I just didn't have it on my top 5. The audience, like by 20 points, had it as their number 1. So they disagree with us, Darren.
There you go. Should we do honorable mentions and then the final tally list?
Yeah, and then just so do we want to include the audience in our or is it your and I's? Is it a Tastemakers list? Like, are we could double our points? We could,
I think what we should do is put the two of our lists together, and if there are any ties, the audience will break the tie.
That makes sense to me.
Okay. All right. Okay. Honorable mentions for me. I already mentioned Adolescence. I'd also put Hacks on there.
I had Hacks on my honorable mentions. Yeah.
The Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time had one of the best episodes of TV that I've seen ever. It just, I think, collectively is just not as good.
I would also put Apple Cider Vinegar. I thought it was very good.
Oh, I forgot about Apple. This is a really good TV year, Ted. I forgot about Apple Cider Vinegar. I loved Apple Cider Vinegar. Yeah.
Silo season 2, I thought was very good.
Yeah, I'm a little less high on Silo, but
it was the lowest of my honorable mentions. And also a show that hasn't quite finished yet, but I'm excited to talk about next week when it does. Murderbot. I thought Murderbot was very fun.
Murderbot. Yeah, no, I like Murderbot. I think it's very fun. Department Q is a show that I have my honorable mentions. Adults, The Studio, the 4 seasons. I tend to be less high on comedies. Like, funny that The Bear is my number 1, but I tend to be. Because
The Bear is not a comedy.
No, I know. I tend to like if I took the best comedy and the best drama, I would tend to like value the weight of the best drama over the best comedy. So I think that kind of bears out in my list where like my honorable mentions end up being comedies. And then the other bears out. And then the other one is Everybody's Live with John Mulaney is the show that I like I ultimately left it on because I didn't think it felt like in spirit in the list. I feel like The Rehearsal is more in spirit with the list than Everybody's Live, but I really liked Everybody's Live with John Mulaney. And then let me just see the audience ranks out with The Last of Us. One we have not mentioned at all is The White Lotus was on there. And Yellow Jackets, which I thought was an excellent season of television. Very fun, but I think maybe I don't this is going to sound like I'm saying it's bad. I thought more fun than it is good, which makes it sound like I'm saying it's bad, which is not true. It was still good, but it was more fun than it was like, perfect television, I think. Yeah.
All right. So what is the final list? What are we posting in the description?
Okay, so our list ends up being officially The Pit becomes number 1 because collectively you and I gave it 4 and 5 points. The Rehearsal is in number 2 because it gets 2 and 3 points directly with a bonus point for being higher on the audience list. Then The Bear, which I had. The Bear comes in at number 3 because I ranked it so high, unfortunately. And then, I feel like the problem is that the shows that I ranked, just me, are higher on the list. on my list than your ones that you didn't rank. So we get the Bear, and then Adolescence, and then at number 5 is Andor. So
I think that's a pretty good list.
pretty good list. Number 6 would be The Last of Us. So collectively, we only had one difference in our list, right? We only had one show that we didn't.
Yeah, I think
No, no,
so.
no. Adolescence and The Bear I put on. So I'm missing something from. Squid Game. Squid Game needs to be on here, and I'm so sorry. It's
Squid Game would have gotten 4 points for second place.
and then then Adolescence would have been. So actually, yeah. So this like kind of like bumps Andor off the list, basically.
Sorry.
Yeah. Let me take.
I mean, that feels wrong to me. I'm not gonna lie. Squid Game, more of a personal pick. I feel like Andor probably should be on the list overall.
But this is your and I's list. So here's how
Sure.
it actually include. So instead of a top 5, we actually have a top 7 because basically, like, is it a top 7? Yeah, because we each added an additional. So we have the Pit, the Rehearsal, the Bear, Adolescence, Squid Game, and or The Last of Us. Is how our list shakes out.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. That is the list. Best TV of the year so far. It is a tough one because there's a lot of good TV this year so far. But we are now going to get into some spoilers for Squid Game Season 3. If you have not watched yet and you plan to watch, you can bounce out now and come back later. Or you can listen to this because you don't plan to watch or you don't care. And in that case, enjoy our discussion about Squid Game Season 3. Here we go. Okay, so we talked about this last week. We'd both seen 2 episodes. I was saying I really enjoyed both episodes, but I've heard that people don't love the ending. And so I was kind of concerned. I was like, hopefully this is one of those situations where I like it more than other people because I want to enjoy it and I hope it's not bad. And I kept waiting for like, when's the thing going to happen that people are so mad about? And then it never really came for me. And I was like, were they mad about Kate Blanchett? Like, I'm not sure.
You just like kept waiting. You like watch the whole credits to be like, there's got to be something to hate.
I was like, is this another 28 years later where they're just mad at the very last scene? Like, what is happening? I feel like since then I've discovered people really, really hate, again, spoilers, the death of 456. That they do not think that was a good call. Which I find confusing because I find it hard to believe that this series would ever end with him alive, personally.
I think I thought he would live, but I think like it makes way more sense that he dies. I think and once they start to set up that there's this baby, and the baby is sort of he dies so the baby can live. I do think it's a pretty good ending. I mean, in terms of like if this is the story you're trying to tell, if you're not gonna prolong this thing and just keep having him come back, I think it makes sense. There is a thing, Taran, I feel like, earlier we were talking about Dexter. Part of what annoys me so much, like that's what annoyed me about the end of the first run of Dexter's. They like didn't kill Dexter. And I'm like, you mean the guy who kills everybody like doesn't die? Like doesn't make any sense. And I feel like to some degree, I think people, this is like I was hanging out with my nieces all weekend, and not to call all television viewers children, but they were like, can we have candy? Can we have conflict? Can we have all this stuff? And it's like, if you give it to them, they're going to have a stomachache. And I kind of think sometimes if you give a television audience exactly what they want, they won't actually end up being as satisfied as I think they would be. And I think that's kind of the case with what happens with Ji-hoon, who I think if he lives, I think it's not even for me whether he lives or dies. I do think it's like, I think it's a perfectly fine choice for the showrunners to have made that he dies.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is also part of what made the show stressful for me to watch was that I knew, like, thematically it would be bad for this show to have a happy ending. Like, this is a show that is trying to comment on the sort of current state of capitalism and the culture that exists of, sometimes reality television itself, but certainly a lot of capitalism and inequality and so for the ending of the show to be like them succeeding in toppling Squid Games and ending it wouldn't feel true, especially in the current times. Like it would feel so hollow to me, the idea that like, oh, if we just try hard enough, we can end the games. Like that doesn't feel true to life right now. And so I think ultimately what it is instead is it's sort of like the opposite of Andor, right? Where like in Andor, there's a set story. They are fighting against this sort of fascist regime. And I think key to Andor 2 is that they don't actually succeed in Andor. They just
Right.
get just far enough that we have hope that we know they will eventually succeed, which I think is like where Andor needs to be.
Right.
And that's not an Andor spoiler because we already know where Andor ends up based on it's a prequel. And everyone's, I assume, seen Star Wars. But Squid Game is much more, I think, a show about fighting back in the face of loss. Like there's nothing that it's overwhelming sort of like just force against them, oppression. The VIPs, like they are the slightest bit affected. They are a little bit speechless when they see 456 jump off the pillar, and then they probably go home and forget about it. And that is the tiny little bit of impact he was able to have on them. But he was able to have a much bigger impact on some other people, like the front man and the baby, and ultimately that kind of hope and resistance, I think, is what you can take forward from the story. Not that there is like some magic solution that will topple the current structures of society, but that you can try your best to fight, and sometimes that means sacrifice, and sometimes that means just a tiny little win, and that's what you can take from it. But I really appreciated that, especially this like conversation between the front man and 456 about like having faith in people. And when the front man gives 456 the knife and asks him like, do you still think that people are good? Like I felt that because
Yeah.
I'm living in America right now.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
like in some ways, like 456's fight against that instinct was way more inspiring and hopeful to me than an actual win would have been, because that's, I feel like, what I am currently facing in my real life right now.
No, yeah, I think it's a really good point in terms of like what can he actually accomplish? You know, like what can you actually do? And I talk about this all the time that I do feel like every once in a while a show actually zooms too far out where suddenly the stakes of the world are like saving the world. And that's not really what Squid Game is. It is like how these particular people who are put into this situation because of the structure of the world, i.e., like capitalism, that they will choose to risk their life to win money. But he wants to stop the game so that more people don't die, but he's not necessarily like he can't change all of society. There's this thing that my friend Kevin Mahadeo, who's a been a podcast on Pusher Recaps a lot. I've talked to him a lot about character and like so this will sound like a weird segue, but playing a dungeon master, you play every character in the world in Dungeons and Dragons, and I often don't want my then like the default to be that all the characters I play are white. And the one thing he told me one time, he's like, you could play a character of a different race, just don't have the story that you're trying to tell be that you solve racism, like one
Mhm.
character ends up solving all of racism in the whole world. And I was like, oh yeah, so that sticks with me. And I do feel like to an extent, like, yeah, this show wasn't about every single thing. He's just trying to stop these particular games. And I do think it is a powerful message to think that like he sort of has to sacrifice himself in the hopes that that is a powerful enough thing to have happened to stop anything else from happening. And yeah, I think the ending and the metaphorical thing of like he must live so the baby will die. I think what I saw a lot of people be frustrated, like, oh, we're so mad that he died. And then the responses were like, no, we're mad that like they both didn't live, in the sense that like they, if they just had to press that button on the platform and then shove the dad off and then they both live and whatever. But then again, like then he has all this money. Like we've already seen that too. We've seen him
Mhm.
win the games and give all the money, away. Like we've seen that. And so I feel like there does need to be something a little more powerful. And the idea, I think to your point, like, yeah, the it might feel like an immediate satisfying moment for Jen to win the game again and not die and like something happened. But at the same time, like, he's not going to change the entire structure of society to the degree at which, like, there will always probably be people who be willing to go compete in these games and risk their life because they don't feel like they have another choice, as is the case in point, with when we see Kate Blanchett at the end, like, with some American convincing him to go probably play in an American Squid Game. So yeah, I like the ending. For me, that's not the stuff that I found that, like, in terms of it being just a little worse. I think like, as we move away from it, I'll find these things less egregious. I really don't think the American actors work at all in this shit. Like, the dialogue and, like, the voice, it's like, it's so tough. And I'm like, is it ADR, or are they just, like, not
It's
that, which
yeah.
I think they're just probably,
It is ADR.
it
It's so
is ADR.
basically because the actor, one of the actors from those scenes, like, came out and said, like, yeah, that's not my voice. I don't know
Yeah.
why they did that. Like,
I think it's a stylistic choice, honestly, and I do think it probably, like, not being Korean, there is probably something about the way that those voices are depicted that feel a little more like hokey bad guy in a
yeah,
way that they really wanted. So I think it's
there's a
fine.
there's a lot of discussion around, like, yeah, you watch Breaking Bad, and if you can speak Spanish, you're like, oh my god,
Right,
Gus.
right, right, right.
um so I think there's that. I think there's also the fact that, from what I've read, like, it's actually pretty difficult to get
I was thinking that
like,
too.
properly English speaking actors in Korea. Of course, like, Kate Blanchett can show up when they're, like, in LA or whatever,
Yeah.
presumably, but uh and then also, like, I that was, I think, a bigger issue for me in season 1, because I really wasn't expecting it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it really took me out of it. In season 3, I was anticipating it was going to happen again. I was more ready for it. It still wasn't great. I still
My
don't love it,
but my piece
but
is, I don't really care about it in retrospect in season 1, so I'm not really gonna care about it in retrospect from season 3. It's just so fresh in my mind.
there is an element to it that I was able to sort of work with, which is this notion of them just being so over the top and devoid of humanity.
Right.
Especially because I was noticing that it had to at least be somewhat intentional, that they were cutting from such brilliantly acted, dramatic, super tense scenes
Right.
to this, like, over the top Reddit esque dialogue,
Right.
that these people were having about what we were watching. And it felt like it had to be an intentional commentary. Even though I still think it could have been done better, it did still work for me enough that I was able to get through it, and it didn't bother me too much.
So the one other complaint I have that I will acknowledge is, like, and again, I think the more I move away from it, the more these little small details aren't really gonna matter to me, is I do feel like sometimes the way that they're thinking through, like, so particularly the moment that I remember it happening is the beginning of episode 5, where it's the game, like, circle triangle square, when they're on the top, and the way that they're, like, plotting out how they're gonna, like, trick, basically, or, like, what they're gonna do. Like, I feel like at times, sometimes the dialogue felt very convoluted. And the thing I'll give credit for is that I am watching a translated show. And I know that I've heard this, that, like, people will be like, oh man, like, it kind of sucks that the subtitles are not perfect, that
Mhm.
there are little nuances, and likely the fact that I might be missing a cultural piece in terms of, like, why the way that they try to make a team or make a deal, like, actually makes more sense in Korean culture than it does for me, that I'm just, like, butting up against slightly. But I feel like sometimes it feels, I think, especially on the top of that platform the first time, there was something about it that felt a little too convoluted for me in a way that I thought that worked. But then I have to, like, this whole show is like, they're playing, hide and go, killer hide and go seek. They're playing, red light, green light in the killer, like, it's fine. I ultimately think that, like, the themes of the show and the performances in the scenes where it is really working, I think, like, are so good, that it sort of weighs out. The other complaint I've heard that I'm not bothered with, but at all, is a lot of people, I feel like, online have talked about the boat stuff not working for them at all. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm into it when we're in the Squid Game and I'm not into it. I actually disagree. I actually
Yeah, me
find
too.
And the reason why it does is because it's close enough. Like, it does feel like that thing of, like, I joke about this all the time, like Westworld season 1 versus Westworld season 2. We're in the park now, we're the whole world. Like, yeah, we're certainly outside the Squid Game, but the whole point was them trying to get to Squid Game. It wasn't about, them trying to track down a government official who's gonna, like, like, it wasn't that. It's so, to me, like, connected to the actual game that I thought it, like, worked for me, and I like the captain being sort of the turncoat. It worked for me. I get that people don't like it, but I didn't have an issue with it at all.
Yeah, I heard like people saying like, oh well, it in the end it never went anywhere, which isn't really true. I think that they really bounce off of the scene of um, him like yelling out to his brother and his brother not saying anything, and then like that's the confrontation. Which in some ways I get, but I think in other ways like it had to be that way with this frontman character, and ultimately them finding the island leads to its destruction. Like
Right.
it is still a big deal, and I do think there's a lot in that storyline that is valuable. I don't think it's the strongest storyline of the show, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
yeah, I definitely don't agree that it was like worthless to spend time there, especially because there's so much there for the surrounding characters and the ending ultimately. In terms of the translation, I did see a couple of things. One of them being like the guy, I don't remember his name or number, the guy who like didn't bring the ammunition. Like his whole thing was like, oh, I wasn't really in the Marines or whatever.
Yeah.
I believe that that was sort of an oversimplification. Basically, like he was in the army, but just wasn't part of like
Right.
the like fighting force essentially. And then I think even more importantly, when 333 is holding the baby over the ledge, I believe the translation in the subtitles was like, I will do this, I will drop the baby. But I heard this at least, that the translation could probably be closer read as like, I can do this. Which I actually think is a pretty interesting subtle shift in the language there.
Yeah,
Um,
it
but
is.
yeah, I mean, I think that there, in terms of criticism, I do think where I see flaws, yes, the VIPs, obviously, I think were a bit flawed in how they approach those. But I think also something that I do think is valid is that I do think that there was a little bit of like convoluted, how do we move the pieces in place in order to get to where we need to go, especially in that final game. As somebody that watches a lot of like The Devil's Plan or Big Brother or whatever, like I feel like I could have written a more satisfying and logical, natural conclusion for how exactly these people were tricked into various situations than what we got, which just felt a little too like perfectly put in place at times. And then even just the way that like, oh, then they didn't press the button at the end. Well, why was there even a button to begin with? Well, there was a button to begin with because they wanted this particular ending to play out the way that it did. And so I think if that had been cleaned up, I think it would have helped a lot, especially because I think that's the kind of thing that like if you, like me, sort of saw where it was going and liked where it was going, was fine where it was going, you can kind of overlook those things. But if you really hated where it was going, whether you saw it coming
Agreed.
or not, then you're really gonna like those points are really gonna stick with you. Like, well, it should like this thing I didn't want to happen shouldn't have even happened because it was a stupid thing that caused it in the first place that never should have happened. And so I think that if you're going to make a big, bold move like killing off your main character, I do think that you want to be as airtight as possible in the mechanisms for how to get there. You really want to make it feel like it had to happen, or at least that like the way that it happened felt natural and not forced. And I think that that's where a lot of people, I would say, justifiably bounce off of it. For me, because it was something that I felt fit so well thematically and just plot wise and everything, I was able to look past those things. But I certainly wouldn't blame anyone who's like, man, it really just bugs me that like they just didn't press the button or that the button existed at all. Like in order to get this specific outcome where like the baby existing at all, it's also like that they had to create a scenario where he
Yeah.
sacrifices himself. So yeah, I get that, and I do wish that it had been cleaned up a bit, but it still worked for me.
In The reason why it works for me, in defense of the show, is that the point of that is not just, yes, obviously, like the story, the writer's notion is that this idea that there'll be two of them left and somebody has to fall off the last platform, but then if the episode, for someone to win, and it has to happen after the button gets pushed, like, okay, that's fine. Like the person you should be mad at, and that's like who you should be mad at is so arbitrary, but like these are the rules of these rich assholes, right? Like that's who, like, like in terms of like, oh, it shouldn't be designed like that. It's designed like, you could say like it's designed like that to get that outcome, but it's also designed in these ways to for these rich people to like create like ridiculous rules that put all these people in ridiculous situations for their own enjoyment, so that somebody has to die. So I don't know. In that sense, I can like really defend the like the button has to be pressed thing. That rule, because I think that it emphasizes and maybe you know probably you could add one line of dialogue where one of the VIP is, or like the frontman says, like, you know, gives a reason why they like wanted it to be like that, and it's a little more solid probably, but I don't mind it because of that. Um, so the other thing I give the season credit for is, we had watched two episodes last week, and the one thing I was feeling already was just like I was so happy with how ruthless they were being. How many characters they were willing to kill off. And I know it's Squid Game, and like in season one, we see like everybody we love basically die, but I appreciated the sense of like by episode two, we had lost a lot of people who they had built up in season two. And actually, it's one of the defenses I will give to splitting up this last season, is that I actually thought then that worked really well, because the sense of like, oh well, all the people we like have stuck around, like maybe they're going to hang around the whole season, and by the end of episode two, a personal favorite of mine, obviously, like the one trans character we met in the show, Hanju, gets killed off in a way that I thought was like, I'm like sad, but like I thought it worked
It's
as a
brutal.
character moment. It's brutal, but
I
it's
mean,
good
and that's, I
storytelling.
think, another important part of the boat storyline is that I think that it is designed to to like give you this plausible hope that something that they will be saved, because obviously
Right.
if the games play out the way they're going to play out, you kind of know that everyone but 4, 5, 6 is going to die. Um,
Right.
so the fact that the boat storyline exists gives you hope that something will stop this at some point, and that these people might have a chance to live. And then even toward the end, there's a chance like maybe they'll get there in time for 4, 5, 6. And you kind of know by then that it's not going to happen, but like that is still, I think, a key vital part of the way that they told this story as well. Yeah, I thought it was great.
Last thing I'll say, comment to the show that they, and I'm sure that they could keep doing this, but I did think all the games, even more so than season one, where I was a little like, again, I'm not of Korean culture and I don't know that much about Korean culture. So like, the game sometimes would be like, oh yeah, red light, green light. Like I'm a summer camper. I played a lot of kids games, I did think like when I saw, a killer hide and go seek, I was like, that's brilliant. The jump rope game I thought was really brilliant. The last one obviously
The
like is a little
song,
bit the
Jump
song.
Rope song,
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah, it's really good. So I was like really impressed by like the games in the back half as well. I mean, the last one is
I
like a
agree.
little like, whatever, but the end of the first one is just like a knife fight, right? So yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, good stuff. And then obviously the ending in LA, Kate Blanchett, and the implication, of course, that there has been rumors that there will be some kind of spinoff at some point. David Fincher has been in talks about, or has been rumored to be potentially in charge of something along those lines. Who knows? I think at this point, I don't think there's been any confirmation yet. But with the numbers being what they are for season 3, I imagine we will likely get some kind of spinoff. And it seems as though they're setting that up to be in America. But I think that, like, honestly, I think that is maybe even a little bit of a misread. I think that the idea of the frontman noticing, because the creator of the show talked about how he did originally think, or at least he had thought of an idea where that was 4, 5, 6 in America, seeing Kate Blanchett like in the US, and like that being the ending of like horrified, like, oh my God, it's here too. Um, I think that what they did was more effective. But I think the point wasn't to be like, oh, and now there's the American spinoff. I think the point was much more so like, yeah, this is everywhere. This is capitalism. Of course, it's in the US. Of course, that like, you know, this will continue on in these places. And they hinted at that too. I think one of the VIPs said something along like, "Oh, the Korean games are always the best."
Right.
And so I don't think this was intentionally designed to be like there's a spinoff coming, even though there likely is a spinoff coming.
I think it's a really good point. I definitely viewed it as like, oh yeah, they are gonna do something. I viewed it as like they're gonna do something else, and especially an American one. Although it's interesting that then it's Kate Blanchett, who's not American, but
Yeah.
whatever. I viewed it that way, but I really like it, and I actually think that like your framing of why Gianna like kind of had to die, like, and then in coordination with this, I think I like it. I like the ending a little more than I maybe did coming into this. In the sense that it's not just the front man that he's up. It's again he's up against all of society. The fact that this is the way our society is structured, and so that one extra beat of being like, because like that's what he was up against. Even if he can convince the front man like kind of not to do it anymore, it's so ingrained, like that thing is so ingrained. So I actually really like that. I do think it can work. I mean, the reason why I think it can work as an American version is mostly because for as much as I think Squid Game is pretty revolutionary, it's not revolutionary of the idea of like death games. Like we've been
Yeah.
doing this for a long time, and so we've seen Hunger Games is probably the best example of an American version of this that's worked. So I think it can work again, and I actually got kind of excited. I did see a complaint of like, why would they play that specific game? Like, I
Mhm.
wonder whether it would have made some sense to like Americanize the game, whether it's like rock paper scissors or something. I don't know, but I don't have a huge problem with it in terms of this being the Korean game show Squid Game, that being the thing that they're doing at the end. So I don't mind it.
Yeah. All right. Well, told you this would be a jam-packed episode of the Tastemakers. Here we are. There is one more thing I wanted to talk about, but obviously we do not have time this week, so we will maybe make time for it next week if we can. But the New York Times top 100 movies of the century so far
Yep. Yep.
has concluded. They have named their top 100. So we will go over those movies next week, if as long as we have time.
That's right.
I have also started to make a list of my own.
Okay, fun. And I know people gave their they I also had a question on the poll this week of like what's the best movie you've seen so far this year, but okay, let me ponder up what my well, I did think I did submit a ballot. I'll see if I can dredge that back up as well. We can talk
Well,
about our
interestingly, I have about 96 movies in of the current century that have been rated a 10 or a 9 out of 10. So I'm close to there already.
Wow, that's fun. Okay, interesting. All right.
Although to be fair, some of them I
Oh,
actually wouldn't put in my top 100 because
yeah. Also, not that it was like that surprising, but we totally nailed what the number one movie was.
oh yeah, we totally did. it was
Like
it,
it's
we'll
probably
talk
just
about it next week.
it's probably
It was
just that
Parasite.
movie. Yeah,
It
it's
was
fair.
Parasite. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us here this week. Of course, Big Brother is starting. That's another show that's starting this week. Big
Yeah.
Brother. So be ready for that. There's going to be a lot of coverage coming your way from me. I believe the cast will likely drop tomorrow if you're watching this or listening to this on Monday. And so make sure you check out my podcast with Rob for the cast reactions. I'll have lots to talk about. Of course, you can also check out what's going on over on Twitch and YouTube. I just started watching, or rewatching, I should say, and reacting to The Genius season 1, the Korean edition
Oh,
from
fun.
like over 10 years ago.
I
And it's
feel like
very
I'm
funny
due a
how much I
rewatch.
have forgotten.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's over on Patreon if you want to check that out as well. Grace, what are you up to?
I'm on social media at Hi From Grace, at Go From Grace. I did a movie roundup. Arrow and I have been doing a monthly movie roundup. We go into a little bit more, sometimes spoiler details. We talked Materialist. We had a fervent debate about whether it worked or not. I think it worked. Ariel did not think it worked. So over on the Crying Laughing podcast feed. And yeah, check out my stuff on Parade and on Popeyes, starting a rewatch of this TV show Dark as of next week. Poker Face wraps up this week. I'll be recapping Dark as of next week. That's over on Pop Heist. So, and interviews over on Parade.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us here today, and we will see all of you next time.